Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? This time we're tackling the book of Job,
Oh yeah, Job. That's
a heavy one.
it's a tough one. It really is.
It's one of the oldest books in the Bible, a story of faith, suffering, you know,
A class.
the mysteries of God's plan, why bad things happen to good people, all that. And we're going to focus on just the first three chapters today to really set the scene.
Yeah, get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. So we're introduced to Job right off the bat, and he's described as this perfect and upright man
Perfect. That's a high bar right there.
who feared God and eschewed evil, the text says, you know?
Like the ideal follower.
Yeah. Yet, this guy, he's about to face suffering that would test the faith of anyone. I mean, talk about a contradiction.
Well, that's the whole point, right? I mean, the story wouldn't be very interesting if he just sailed through life with no problems.
Right. So let's paint a picture of Job's life before all the, what hits the fan. He's incredibly wealthy,
Like really wealthy.
lives in the land of Uz.
Does. Okay.
Huge family, 7 sons, 3 daughters.
Wow. That's a lot of kids.
Lots of livestock, more than you can imagine.
Must have smelled great.
Oh, yeah. But beyond all the material wealth, Job was deeply spiritual, always offering sacrifices, praying for his children,
But Dad,
worried they might, stray from God's path.
understandable.
Think of the most devout person you know. I mean, how does Job compare?
He's like the poster child for righteousness.
Exactly. Which is what makes what happens next so mind-blowing. Because suddenly, we're taken to a scene in heaven, and Satan's there, hanging out before God. And God, like a proud parent, points out Job.
Showing him off.
Look at my servant Job, a man of faith, integrity, top-notch. But Satan, always the cynic, he challenges God's assessment.
The ultimate skeptic.
He's like, oh, is he really so righteous? Or is it just because you've blessed him with all this stuff, take it all away, and I bet he'll curse you to your face?
Bold move, Satan.
So Satan basically proposes this wager. Strip Job of everything, he says, and Job's true nature will be revealed. And God, trusting in Job's integrity,
Maybe a little overconfident.
allows the test. But with one condition. Satan, he can't directly harm Job himself.
So the suffering begins, but it's like all at arm's length, right?
Yeah. And it's like a rapid-fire succession of tragedies. First, Job's oxen and donkeys are stolen. Then fire consumes all his sheep. And then the camels are taken, just blow after blow. It's like when it rains, it pours.
And this is just the beginning.
Right. I mean, can you imagine the emotional weight of each of these losses piling up on Job? You'd think this would be the breaking point, but then the most unimaginable news arrives. All of Job's children, all 10 of them, are killed when a sudden storm collapses the house they're in.
Oh, man. I mean, how do you even process that kind of grief?
It's unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because what do you think Job's reaction is?
I'm guessing he's not throwing a party.
No. But instead of cursing God, railing against the heavens, he tears his clothes, shaves his head, falls to the ground,
Yeah.
and worships.
He worships.
He utters those famous words, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." It's this powerful testament to his unwavering faith, this acceptance of God's will, even when it makes absolutely no sense. So listener, how would you react in this situation? Could your faith withstand this kind of test?
Yeah. It really makes you think about what true faith means, doesn't it?
Totally. But the story's not over yet. Satan, he's not satisfied. He's like round 2, and he goes back to heaven for another go.
Oh, boy. Here we go again.
And God, he's still praising Job. Look at him, still righteous. My man Job can take it.
God's got a lot of faith in Job. I'll give him that.
But Satan, he's undeterred. He's like, yeah, but what about some physical pain? I bet that'll break him.
So he's escalating the wager, basically.
Clearly. And God allows it, but again, with limits. Satan can inflict suffering, but he cannot kill Job.
It's like this cosmic test of endurance.
So Satan unleashes these painful boils on Job, covering his entire body head to toe. Constant agony, unbearable itching, can you imagine? And Job's reduced to sitting in ashes, scraping at his sores with broken pottery.
That's a brutal image.
It's horrific, right?
Yeah.
And it's here that another character enters the story, Job's wife. She's witnessing all this unimaginable suffering, and she just breaks down. She says to Job, "Curse God and die."
I mean, you can understand her desperation, right?
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to see an end to that kind of pain?
Exactly. But even in his agony, Job refuses. He tells his wife, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" He's still holding on to his faith, even when everyone and everything around him is telling him to let go.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You have to wonder, how long can he keep this up?
I know, right? And that's when things get even more complicated. Because 3 of Job's friends show up, having heard about everything that's happened.
Oh no, this can't be good.
And their arrival adds a whole new dimension to Job's struggle. But we'll have to dive into that in part 2. So we left Job in a pretty bad place, right? I mean, his body's racked with pain, his family is gone, his wife's telling him to give up on God.
Yeah, it's like, what else could go wrong?
Well, that's when his friends show up.
Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. You'd think having some company would be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But it actually makes things a lot more complicated for Job.
Yeah, their intentions are good. They've come to comfort him. But they bring a whole lot of baggage with them.
Baggage.
Well, they have this very specific worldview, right? They believe that suffering is always a consequence of sin. Like, you must have done something wrong to deserve this.
Oh, I see. So they're not exactly coming in with open minds.
Not really. And their arrival is actually described in a pretty dramatic way. They're so overwhelmed by Job's condition that they weep and tear their clothes and just sit with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights.
Wow, 7 days. That's a long time to just sit in silence.
It really shows the depth of Job's suffering and how it affects everyone around him.
It's like they don't even know what to say. They're just speechless with grief.
Exactly. But eventually, the silence is broken. And that's when the real drama begins.
So what happens? Do they finally offer Job some words of comfort?
Well, sort of. But their comfort comes with a lot of strings attached. They start questioning Job about his life, trying to figure out what he could have possibly done to deserve this kind of punishment.
Oh boy. Here we go with the blame game.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this idea that suffering equals punishment, it's something that a lot of people still believe today. What do you think, listener? Have you ever fallen into that trap?
It's definitely tempting to try to make sense of suffering by finding someone or something to blame.
Right. It's like we need to have a reason for why bad things happen. Otherwise, it just feels too random, too chaotic.
But Job, even in all his pain and misery, he rejects this simple explanation. He insists that he hasn't done anything to deserve this.
Which is a pretty bold claim, considering everything that's happened to him.
It is. And that's where the big debate begins. Job and his friends go back and forth, arguing about the nature of suffering, the role of God in human life, all the big questions.
It's like a philosophical showdown. And the book doesn't shy away from presenting these different perspectives, these conflicting views.
It's not trying to give us a neat and tidy answer.
No, it's more like the author is inviting us to wrestle with these questions alongside Job and his friends.
To grapple with the mystery of suffering, the complexity of faith.
And to acknowledge that sometimes there just aren't easy answers.
Right. Like life can be messy and unfair, and bad things do happen to good people. And that's okay to admit that, to struggle with that.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes the book of Job so relevant, even thousands of years later.
It speaks to the human experience in a way that few other texts can.
So as we move forward, I want you to keep in mind that image of Job worshiping God right after his children died.
That moment of radical acceptance.
Because it really gets to the heart of what this story is about. It's about faith, not as blind obedience or denial, but as a choice to hold on to hope, even when everything seems lost.
Even when you have every reason to give up.
Exactly. And that's something I think we can all learn from, whether we're religious or not.
It's a powerful message. So where do we go from here? What happens next in this cosmic drama?
So we've got Job, still suffering, friends, still trying to figure out what he did wrong.
Still convinced it's got to be his fault somehow, right?
Yeah, it's like they can't wrap their heads around the idea that maybe, just maybe, bad things can happen to good people for no reason.
It's challenging their whole worldview, isn't it?
Totally. And Job, he's not making it easy on them. He keeps pushing back, questioning their assumptions, challenging their logic.
He's not just passively accepting their explanations.
No. He's engaged in this intense theological debate, trying to understand his own suffering, trying to make sense of God's actions.
And in doing so, he's actually raising some pretty profound questions about the nature of faith, the problem of evil, all the big stuff.
The stuff that's been bothering philosophers and theologians for centuries.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that makes the book of Job so powerful. It doesn't shy away from these difficult questions. It doesn't try to give us easy answers or simplistic solutions.
It forces us to confront the complexity of the human experience, the reality of suffering, the mystery of God.
So what are some of the key questions that Job raises?
Well, one of the big ones is, why do the righteous suffer? If God is just and all-powerful, why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah, that's a question that's been asked and debated for millennia.
And there's no easy answer. But Job's struggle with this question, his willingness to challenge God, to even accuse God of injustice, it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Especially when we're going through our own times of suffering or loss.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that Job never actually curses God. He questions God, he challenges God, he even yells at God. But he never completely abandons his faith.
There's always this underlying belief, this stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a bigger picture that he doesn't understand.
And I think that's a really important message for anyone who's struggling with their own faith. It's okay to doubt, it's okay to question, it's even okay to get angry, but don't give up on the possibility of something more, something beyond our limited human understanding.
So in the end, does Job ever get an answer to his questions? Does God ever explain why all this happened?
Well, that's something we'll have to save for another deep dive. But I think the real answer lies not in some grand explanation from God, but in Job's own journey of faith and resilience.
In his willingness to wrestle with the unknown, to hold on to hope even when it seems impossible?
And to ultimately find meaning and purpose in his suffering, even if he never fully understands why it happened.
And that's a powerful message for all of us, I think. Life is full of mysteries, and sometimes bad things happen for no apparent reason. But even in the midst of suffering, we can choose to hold on to hope, to keep searching for meaning, to keep believing that there's something more to this life than what we can see and understand.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Job. It's a story that's challenged and inspired people for centuries, and we hope it's given you something to think about, something to wrestle with as you continue your own journey of faith and discovery.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the ancient wisdom of the